That's interesting. So if anybody else has got any questions that they want to pop to the dynamic duo here, please do put them in the Q&A section. We would love to hear from you. So you've mentioned the core Web Vitals there, which is another thing from Google. And they provide the Lighthouse tools as well, which I know is quite an important, or at least quite a useful thing for measuring web page speed. Is that the go-to place to run a quick and dirty test on your websites, or would you recommend people head somewhere else?
I think if you're new to performance, Lighthouse is a very friendly tool. I would not focus on, the scores at the top. Everyone's like Lighthouse 100, but that's not really the most important thing. What is important is that they do give you, like, for example, those metrics we were just talking about, and then they give you specific examples of things you should improve. And if you open out those little things, there's usually an article linked. So that can be very helpful if you're kind of new to performance. But Jonathan and I were talking earlier about other things like web page tests, which is really a go-to if you really want to look at how your users are are experiencing the page load and seeing thumbnails of like each, I don't know what it breaks down to, like hundredths of a second, but yeah.
I think the thing is that those testing tools are very much synthetic tests. So you're testing it on your computer, which is ideal sort of situation, or you're testing it on a server, which is, again, an ideal world, right? But our users are not in the ideal world. So it's better to consider real user metrics. So that is where you're actually capturing the data on your users' devices. So there's a few ways you can do this. There's tools like SpeedCurve, which with SpeedCurve you can just drop it on your website, pay them some money, and it'll start capturing the real user metrics. An alternative to that is actually Web Vitals has a JavaScript library, so you can use that JavaScript library to write your own capturing tools, and then you can just send that off to your analytics. So send that to Google Analytics, send it to Segment. And then you can then analyze that yourself. So getting real information about what's happening in the user's browsers. And you might be surprised. You might find actually it's faster than you expected because everyone is on fast connections. Or your users might be on terrible connections, and you might need to improve performance. I know for us at RVU, we use a library to capture the metrics locally. We then send it to a segment, which pumps it into BigQuery, and then BigQuery allows us to analyze the actual performance.
Another thing is if you're in one of the more frequented websites, they actually might be profiling it for you already with the Chrome User Experience Report. It's kind of like HTTP Archive where they gather data periodically. And so I think some of the Web Vitals are in that. And if for example, you go into the, there's a couple ways you can get it. It's not Lighthouse. What's that other tool? PageSpeed Insights. You can see your Crux data there, Crux for short. And also in the search engine tool, what is it called? The Search Console for Google. You can see your data there too, if you have enough of it, or if you're a more frequented website.
Okay. So based upon your experience, do you find much difference between the automated tests and real user tests in terms of their speed?
Yeah.
Yes, we've not been able to correlate synthetic tests to real user tests at the moment. We're trying to work out how we can make our synthetic tests more accurate, because ideally we'd be able to then test every build and accurately know how it's performing in the wild. But right now we don't have that accuracy, because we can't correlate it.
Yeah. Also, I would say, even for the people that are in this panel or watching this panel, think about what kind of computer you have and what kind of mobile device you have. And I would venture to stereotype the developer crowd and say that we probably have more powerful computers and more powerful mobile devices. And if you look at something that's more middle of the market, like if you've ever bought, for example, a phone like that and tried, you can actually hook it up to your computer and run and run Chrome DevTools on it and get a profile of speed and performance. And it's a completely different experience than if you're using your, I don't even know what version iPhone is on right now, or like your Pixel 4 or whatever. It's a totally different experience. And we forget about that because we don't use those tools.
Yeah, there's an interesting graph, I think it was shared by Ali Osmani, showing like the pass times on different devices. And what was quite interesting was an iPhone, I think it was like X at the time or something, was able to pass JavaScript faster than
a computer.
Chrome on a MacBook Pro. Like, these devices we're carrying in our pockets, if as developers, not ridiculously powerful, probably way too powerful for what they really need to be. But they're ridiculously powerful, but the average user hasn't got that.
Yeah.
So we'll add that to our list. We want downgraded mobile phones and never to use React again. Right, okay. We're getting a profile of you now, Jonathan. So we've had another question come in from the audience. CSS in JS or keeping JS, CSS, and HTML separate? When it comes to performance, are there any...
They're trying to get us hate mail.
It's controversial, right?
I know, right? I actually don't find it as controversial because of build tools. Like, for me, it doesn't matter as long as in your build tool, you're then extracting that CSS and loading it as CSS rather than as JavaScript.
The problem with them, though, is it typically breaks cacheability because your CSS changes more often, resulting in your users not having it in their cache as often. Like, if you do a slight bug fix to your JavaScript, you then have a different hash on your JavaScript file, which relates to the actual built output changing. So that's my problem with it. Like,
does that happen when it's extracted? So I use Webpack mostly, and I know not everyone does, but I forgot the name of the tools that you use, but that extract the CSS out, and then like style components, for example, will actually inline some of that CSS at the inside the HTML. So and like the rest of it will come separately, which is actually like a faster pattern if you want to inline your critical CSS. And there's tools to do that. You don't want to manually do that yourself.
No.
But if it creates this actual separate CSS file, does that hash change? I don't know. That's an interesting question. Like if you change the JavaScript, does it still change the CSS file hash?
It also, you can't optimize your JavaScript, your CSS the same as you can if you write pure CSS. So like if I'm writing Sass, for example, right, I can choose how I chain my CSS. I can choose how I write my selectors, whereas you lose all that control in CSS and JS, which again makes performance worse because you end up with a lot more CSS.
Okay, so that brings us nicely.
Oh yeah, sorry. I personally stopped using CSS and JS only because it's harder for me to migrate that CSS. So I've gone back to using like classes and IDs if I need to, and doing like more old-fashioned CSS because it's easier for me to take that from project to project, regardless of what the front end is using, whether it's using like a framework or whether it's not using a framework or whatever. But that's a different reason why I've moved away from it.
But it is a consideration, when we're developing these websites, the performance of the developer does need to be considered to some extent, and that sounds like a perfect case of that. We've kind of trundled into talking about bundle sizes and things like that. So when it comes to optimizing JavaScript, obviously the less of it, the better. Is there any other considerations we should have when we're thinking about performance in JavaScript?
Do you want to go first?
I guess from a size perspective, like you want to keep obviously your size small, but like you also want to be looking at the libraries you're using. Like if they are really slow libraries that have like crazy loops and stuff, or doing crazy sort algorithms, etc., like that could impact your performance actually more than the bundle size. Like how well that code is written can impact the performance worse.
Yeah, that's true. I wouldn't load just any dependency. I kind of only load trusted dependencies And then also sometimes there's better options for that. Like if you use bundle Phobia, you can see if there's a better library that's smaller or that can only impart part of that. Like for example, instead of loading all of Lodash, you can use Lodash ES and only load the functions that you actually need rather than the entire library.
What was the name of that website or service?
Bundle Phobia.
Bundle Phobia. That sounds like a really useful thing.
Yeah, let me get a link and I'll put it in the chat.
Tie it into your pull requests. So what I've done is like there's a tool called Danger.js, which allows you to very quickly write like actions that happen on pull requests. And so either you have got whenever you add a new library, so it looks at the JSON package JSON file, it will then test against bundle Phobia. We're like, okay, so you've added this much JavaScript to your project. So making it very visible to people reviewing the pull request what that library that's been added causes.
And then I do want to note that like sometimes it's good to note that sometimes these libraries are going to do it better than if you tried it yourself. So it's not like don't use any dependencies, but like just be careful and know what you're doing. Like I'm going to trust Lodash to do some things better than me because let's be frank.
Although isn't there a website that's like you don't need Lodash? Like just like we have you don't.
Oh, is that? Oh, probably because there's like JavaScript itself can do a lot of things.
Okay.
And then I would say, like I mentioned earlier, I would look at if you are transpiling your JavaScript down, like this can literally it can literally make your site twice as slow. Sorry, does that make sense? You can get like a 20 to 50% boost by not transpiling down to ES5. So take a look at your user base, what kind of browsers are using and what's supported. Like for example, modules are supported in modern browsers. You don't need arrow functions, const, let, all of these things are already supported by browsers. So you might not need to transpile, but you might still need to, but you can also differentially serve bundles based on what the user's browser is. And there's a few different ways of doing that. I should write an article on it. There's a few articles. I have a talk on it. But yeah.
I would love to read that article, by the way.
Yeah.
When it comes to splitting bundles and serving different packages to users in different browsers, does that affect performance beyond the savings of not providing all that transpiled code to a modern browser?
Are you talking about like multiple files versus one giant bundle?
No. So if you've got an old browser and a new browser and you're serving two different versions of your JavaScript to each of those browsers, are there any performance concerns around actually doing that process? So if it takes half a second to determine which browser somebody's on.
Oh, so there's some things that actually are already built in. So for the most part, if you do script type equals module, a modern browser will know to load that one.
Okay.
And then if you do a script and you put the no module attribute on it, modern browsers will know to ignore that one. So they won't load that one. So for the most part, modern browsers handle it fine. It's more the older browsers. So as long as they're a small portion of your community, there's a chance sometimes that will load both. But it was really Safari that had all these bugs. It was really weird. And also Edge before Chromium, it would might load it 3 times or something weird. It was kind of ridiculous. I can find a link. But for the most part, that works. And old browsers don't understand type equals module, so they'll just ignore that thing. Kind of like the picture tags, like you can use picture tags in HTML, but the old browsers will just ignore that because they don't understand.
When we're saying old browsers, what are we talking about here? IE6, Mosaic?
IE6. I've never had to support Mosaic.
Okay. So
I support these days IE11.
Yeah. I would include IE11 actually.
We had a question. IE8?
Yes. I would say anything that's Internet Explorer. But also I might be extreme in that I feel like the more we support these old browsers, the less likely people are moving off of them. So I'd like to see more and more websites not supporting old browsers and just letting it look terrible and janky, and so that we can finally get people to download newer browsers. But part of the problem is I think more in government and other institutions is that they only allow Internet Explorer, I still don't understand. So I'm like, it's not secure, but whatever.
No, and people on those computers at work should not be browsing hobby websites. Although I suppose the people here build big websites that everybody around the world uses, don't they?
I only build hobby websites. No.
So we've got 2 minutes left. I wondered if either of you or both of you want to impart your final little piece of performance wisdom onto the audience. What's your top tip when we're thinking about web performance?
So I would work with your team to define a service level objective. Like, what is your worst level of performance that you're willing to accept on your site before you do something? So that, and if you monitor your website to make sure that you are always exceeding that objective, then as soon as something goes wrong and your website gets too slow, you have an agreement within your team that you go down tools and go and fix that, just like you would any incident.
Yeah, I would echo some of that. And like, you can set up budgets and things like that, especially if you're on a team, because it's harder to maintain this on a team, right? Because everyone's just trying to push features, right? And so they're just going to keep loading more and more dependencies, for example, or doing things inefficiently. And if you have a budget, you can see on every pull request, like how much code was added. And, you can even do like a Lighthouse CI or something. But I would also say, if you're more new to this and working individually, like, don't panic. I would measure, and I would always just say measure first. Like, so you don't need to optimize the things you don't need to optimize. And there are a lot of things that can be quick wins, like images. Like, if you do nothing and you have a lot of images on your website, I bet you can get you could get like 50% of your improvement just by implementing better image management. But yeah. It all depends. So measure
And then act if you need to. That was brilliant. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Thank you very much, Sia. I certainly learned a lot. I'm sure everybody watching along did too. So that draws this session to a close.